Hi, welcome back to Storytime with Nana Lynn and Glow. Let's begin Chapter 7 of Another's Treasure. Excuse me. Mary turned around to find a middle-aged woman standing behind her. Can I help you? Mary asked. I hope so, the woman said. Do you have pictures? Pictures? What kind of pictures? Pictures, paintings like you hang on the wall. Oh, certainly, yes we do. If you'll follow me, I'd be happy to help you. The woman stayed behind her as Mary led the way to the far side of the barn. She and her sisters had created an area specifically for large paintings and pictures. They had some that were perfect for a child's room, while others were more suited for living room walls. Another section had cute wall hangings for kitchens. There were a couple of real paintings, but the sisters wondered if they'd sell. Their mother hadn't carried them because she'd said most painters expected top dollar for their work. In a shop like theirs, most customers were looking for bargains. However, the sisters hoped that the tourists who came to Lancaster County might be interested in local art as well. Time would tell. Mary hoped their gamble would pay off. She'd love to display some of her own work, but the idea that her paintings would just sit and gather dust didn't appeal to her in the least. Mary stopped in front of the wall covered with pictures. Maybe you'll see something you like here. As the woman scanned the display, her expression became tight and her mouth turned into a thin line. Finally, she whirled around and scowled at Mary. It's not here. Where is it? Mary was so startled by the woman's reaction, she couldn't think of a response. That seemed to incense the woman even more, and she pointed her finger in Mary's face. You know the one I want. The picture of the girl and the cat. Where is it? The girl and the cat, Mary asked slowly. You mean the Torelli? She studied the woman carefully. What did she know about the missing painting? I don't know the name of the painter. I just know it's a girl and a cat, and I want it. Are you going to tell me where it is? Who told you we had it? The woman looked away from her, as if scouting out the barn to make sure no one was listening. You don't need to know that. I just want the painting. Please, I have to have it. Mary thought quickly. She'd never seen the woman before, but it was obvious that she knew something about the missing painting. Mary decided to change tactics. She smiled at the woman, who was obviously getting more nervous by the moment. I'll tell you what. Let me get your name and number. I know the painting you're talking about. It might still be in storage. As soon as I locate it, I'll call you. Well, for a few seconds, Mary thought her tactic had worked. The woman seemed to consider her request. Then as suddenly as she had mellowed, she was angry again. She stepped up to within a few inches of Mary's face. Although her first reaction was to pull away, Mary stood her ground. I've got to have that painting, and I'll do whatever I must to get it, the woman hissed. With that, she stomped out, leaving Mary stunned. The shock of the woman's threat caused her to freeze momentarily. When she realized she should try to get the woman's license plate number, she ran to the front of the store. As she jogged past, Martha looked at her as if she were crazy, but Mary didn't have time to explain. When she pushed the front door open, she saw a black car racing out of their parking lot, heading for the road. Not knowing what else to do, Mary jumped into her car, planning to follow the woman's vehicle. As she started the engine, she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. If she could just get close enough to snap a picture of the license plate, maybe the police could figure out who the woman was. From there, perhaps they could find out the truth about the painting. This woman seemed to have information about it. Mary was almost to the road when suddenly a buggy pulled in front of her, effectively blocking her way. She slammed on her brakes and stopped within a few feet of the buggy, carrying an Amish couple and their 2 children. They stared at Mary with alarm, clearly written on their faces. Mary got out of her car and apologized for driving too fast, feeling awful. People around Bird in Hand were especially considerate of their Amish neighbors. A terrible accident not far from the town years ago still had everyone on edge. The Amish couple smiled at her graciously and flicked their reins, continuing down the road. Mary got back in her car and waited until they were well clear. Then she turned toward the direction the woman had driven, but it was too late. After traveling a few miles, she couldn't find the car again. Sighing with frustration, she turned around and drove back to the shop. What was it about this painting, and where was it? Mary couldn't wait for Elizabeth to get back so she could tell her what had happened. But for now, she needed to explain her wild behavior to Martha. It took Elizabeth some time to find Uriah's house. She'd driven by it before and thought she knew where it was, but she wasn't great with directions. As she circled a block that she was sure she'd been around at least twice, she finally spotted it. Actually, his home was easy to pick out. It was a huge Victorian in desperate need of paint and attention. The house had been in disrepair before Uriah left, but while he was gone, conditions only worsened. An old wrought iron fence surrounded the property, but many of the decorative railings were either missing or broken. Elizabeth suspected that neighborhood teenagers had busted the fence for the fun of it. The gate hung halfway off, and the yard was overgrown with weeds. If there had ever been grass on the lawn, it had been choked out years ago. Elizabeth parked her car and walked up to the stone sidewalk from the front porch. Sorry. There were broken boards on the floor of the porch, and she carefully stepped around them, hoping her foot wouldn't go through the wood and make a new hole. She knocked gingerly on the dilapidated front door, really hoping no one would answer. After several seconds of silence, Elizabeth heard some odd noises from the other side, a rustling sound, and then suddenly the doorknob rattled. Finally, the door opened slowly, creaking so loudly Elizabeth wanted to cover her ears. A wrinkled, wizened face peered at her through the torn screen door. Uriah's expression reminded Elizabeth of an angry troll. "What do you want?" Uriah asked, staring at her suspiciously. His eyes narrowed into slits. "Hello, Mr. Barnhart. I'm Elizabeth Klassen. You know, from Secondhand Blessings." "Secondhand what? Is this some kind of church? I'm not interested." He started to close the door. Elizabeth knew she wouldn't have guts to go through all this a second time, so she quickly said, No, Mr. Barnhart. I'm not from a church. You bought a sword from us the other day, a Civil War sword? So? You want more money for it? I won't give you another dime. Now get out of here." "No, Mr. Barnhart, I don't want more money. I want to give you some money." That made a difference. Uriah pushed the door open the rest of the way, the creak setting Elizabeth's teeth on edge. "Come in," he barked. Elizabeth stepped past him, unsure of what she might find in the hermit's home. The living room furniture was old and threadbare, but the space was neat. It was obvious the room had been beautiful and elegant at one time. What had happened that he'd let it go to pot like this? "Well, I guess you can sit down there," Uriah said, pointing at the couch. Elizabeth quickly scanned the brocade couch, making sure it was clean. It looked fine, except for a spring that poked out from the cushion near one of the arms. She quickly sat down on the other side. "So I'll ask you again. What do you want? Why do you want to give me money?" Uriah's angry stare made her gulp a couple of times. With effort, she cleared her throat. "I'm truly sorry to bother you with this, Mr. Barnhart, but as I said, I must talk to you about the sword we sold you." Uriah's forehead furrowed, and he raised his eyebrows. His other eye disappeared under an avalanche of wrinkled skin. "I bought that sword, fair and square." "I know that, Mr. Barnhart. I'm not saying you didn't, but there's a problem. The original owner has changed her mind about selling it. I'm here to buy it back from you. I'll give you the full amount you paid." Elizabeth expected her news to irritate the old man. It seemed to have the opposite effect. The corners of his mouth turned up, and his eyes widened with surprise. "She wants it back? Seriously?" He threw his head back and laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. Then he shook his head and pointed his finger at Elizabeth. "You tell Anita Smucker that it will be a cold day in you-know-where before she sees that sword again, and she knows why." He walked over to the door and swung it open. "Well, I don't blame you for coming here, Miss Clausen, but I have no intention of giving you my sword." "But, Mr. Barnhart, surely you can understand why she's changed her mind. I mean, after her dad's death and all." The odd little man rocked back on his heels and smiled strangely at Elizabeth. "She doesn't want that sword returned because it belonged to her father. She wants it back because she finally understands what the sword really means." Elizabeth frowned at him. "What it means? I don't understand." "The real reason she's trying to get it back?" Uriah snapped. "Well, that's for me to know and for you to find out, and I'll thank you to get off my property now." Not knowing what else to do, Elizabeth stood. "Perhaps you could tell me just how much it would take for you to part with the sword. I can pass the information along to Anita." Uriah took a step toward her, and Elizabeth shrank back. "You tell her there's no amount of money in this world that will buy back that sword." He pointed toward the door. "I'm trying to be as nice as I can to you, Miss Klassen, because of your mama. She was always kind to me, But Warren Smucker is through pushing me around. I won't give back what's mine, no matter what the rest of his family says or does. Now you need to leave." Elizabeth couldn't think of anything else to say, so she turned around and headed for the front door. As she passed by an entrance that led to another room, she noticed an antique buffet with something lying on top of it. She was pretty sure it was the sword, but she couldn't be sure. She wanted to ask, but since there was no way to reason with Uriah, she stayed silent. When she stepped out on the front porch, the door slammed shut behind her with an ear-splitting creak, causing her to jump. Elizabeth stood there for a few moments, trying to figure out what to do next. There was nothing left but to tell Anita that she couldn't retrieve the sword. Obviously, Uriah had a past with Warren Smucker, and whatever had happened between them had something to do with that sword. Could it be the item of value that Warren had alluded to? Well, I don't know, but I guess we'll have to find out in Chapter 8. We'll see you next time.